Watching this Israeli spokesperson being destroyed on air on mainstream media outlets is certainly cathartic. Throughout 20 months of genocide, the vast majority of the Western media have allowed the Israeli state to lie, to distort, to deflect, to upend reality, to gaslight. Well, in Britain and other European countries, certainly something seems to be suddenly shifting. Alas, long after Gaza was essentially wiped from the face of the earth. The Israeli spokesman, David Menser, is British by origin, and his political activities in the UK should disturb you, certainly disturb me. I'll come on to that. Let's start with this interview on Sky News with the presenter, Kamali Melbourne.
The Israeli army, they issued warning shots in the air, and still some of these suspects continued to advance towards the troops in a threatening manner. Still, further fire was directed close to them, but not to them, but they continued their advance. So we know very well about this report, but I must tell you again that we have released verifiable footage of Hamas gunmen themselves firing at Gaza,
David,
firing at their own people.
The footage that you just alluded to from the incident on Sunday is disputed. It was not of the
I don't think
Gaza
it's disputed
Health
at
Foundation.
all.
Humanitarian Foundation side.
No, I don't agree with you. I don't think it's disputed at all. It's probably disputed by people that want Hamas to retain control of aid distribution. But we're not going to have that anymore because that is their last vestiges
Let's talk about this incident on Tuesday. Okay, David, let's talk about this incident on Tuesday. 27 people killed. You say there was a threat. Did they have weapons?
Well, you'll have to ask the IDF for the specifics. Points.
I'm asking you. You're here to speak.
Right, and I'll tell you that the IDF is not preventing the arrival of Gazans at humanitarian sites.
That was not my question, David, as you well know. Did they have weapons, David?
It's precisely the opposite. We are encouraging it. Now, the warning shots were fired away from the aid distribution point in response to the threat perceived by IDF troops. Now, we are facilitating, using this independent operation of this NGO, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, specifically, precisely to ensure that aid reaches civilians and not Hamas. Yeah. There have been many, many occasions of Hamas lying to international media, and unfortunately, international media repeating those lies, and that very often leads to dead.
We're not repeating any lies, David. I'm putting the questions to you, and as you well know, in recent weeks we have spoken to Hamas about this. This 27 that were killed, 3 children were killed, 2 women. Were they a threat as well?
Again, every bit of news which comes out of Hamas, of Gaza, is controlled by the terrorist organization. There have been many, I can read you a whole list.
So we can't be trusted is what you're saying?
No, I'm not. I'm saying that you need to verify. Do your jobs, media.
Love to, David,
we are not preventing Gazans from accessing
as you know, David, and as
aid.
you and I have spoken about before, we would love to verify this, but international journalists are not allowed into Gaza, are they? Why not?
Well, I'll tell you very, very clearly what the reason is for that. Our priority is getting our hostages out, not Sky's journalists in. That's our priority. That's what we care about. Now, real journalists enter Gaza with the IDF. Hamas journalists, unfortunately, never leave because they work with Hamas. And to be fair to those journalists reporting from Gaza, you won't be alive very long if you ever do produce any sort of output that is against Hamas, because Hamas will kill you. So many so-called journalists in Gaza, and of course we regret any journalists which have been killed, real journalists, but Hamas operatives.
You're distinguishing between real journalists and fake journalists. The point is, David, journalists aren't allowed, from international organizations, are not allowed into Gaza either. And I'm asking you again, why you don't allow that? Why don't the Israeli government allow journalists in? You'll know the charge that's put to the Israeli government is that they don't want the world to see what's really happening.
Again, so there's no shortage of output from Gaza. It's been on our front of our screens for 20 months now. But our priority is getting our hostages out.
You're not letting.
We want to get our live hostages out, not sending your journalists in. I will remind you that Hamas arrested a BBC journalist about 10 years ago, and they held him. And he was only released when there was an international outcry. And finally, Hamas released him. Now, that same outcry has not happened for our Israeli people being held hostage for more than 600 days now. Our priority is getting our hostages out, not sending your journalists in.
David, that's entirely misleading. You know that there has been international condemnation of the hostages that are still being held. It is untrue for you to make that charge. Right?
I'm not talking about condemnation in words. I'm talking about real action. When real pressure is put on Hamas, the terror organization, things happen.
Well,
hostages are released.
There's a
when they get
process,
stronger. I'll tell you when they get stronger.
Process that's on the way. And it's ongoing, as you know, and we'll come on to that in a moment.
David Menser really is a caricature, and you have to wonder if the Israeli state has just given up trying to convince the British population if that's who they're serving up. Now, we should note that in the Eid massacres, that is Palestinians being massacred as they try and get food for them and their families, Israel has lied through its teeth, originally claiming no incidents had taken place before eventually claiming they'd fired warning shots and then they'd fired at some suspects they refused to identify. Note he's asked if the victims had weapons, that is, to probe what legal justification Israel possibly has for massacring these Palestinians. And then the official Israeli spokesperson says, ask the Israeli military, ask the IDF. He's the Israeli spokesperson. Why would that be necessary? It's useful, isn't it? I'm here to represent the Israeli state and answer all your questions. No, can't ask me that. No, ask someone else. The truth is, he clearly knows these are unarmed civilians. Now, he brings up the video footage released by the Israeli authorities of a totally separate incident, which was criminal gangs firing at Palestinian civilians, criminal gangs who all the evidence point to are in cahoots with the Israeli occupation. His excuse for banning international journalists, for Israel banning those journalists from entering Gaza, is Israel's priority is getting out the hostages. How does that even make any sense? What does one have to do with the other? Why would Israel no longer banning journalists, foreign journalists? Obviously, there's lots of Palestinian journalists, or there were, except obviously they were slaughtered. Why would them no longer banning those foreign journalists entering Gaza interfere with getting the hostages back? What are you talking about? What's absurd is he claims there's a lack of attention for the Israeli hostages when their lives have been treated by Western politicians and media outlets as having infinitely more worth than the Palestinian population of Gaza. And it's also based on a basic, fundamental, deceitful premise, which is that the Israeli state is focused on getting their hostages back. They've only got significant hostage releases through ceasefire agreements, and indeed by releasing Palestinian hostages. Israel has killed far more hostages, of its own hostages, than it's rescued by military means. They even shot dead 3 of their own hostages when they were shirtless, yelling in Hebrew and waving white flags. If Israel wanted to retrieve their hostages above anything else, they wouldn't have behaved anything like this. Now, the reason international journalists are banned is because Israel doesn't want them reporting on Israel's war crimes. It's really straightforward. Now, David Menser counters there's been no shortage of output from Gaza. Well, that's in large part because of the Palestinian journalists who've suffered the biggest massacre of journalists in human history at the hands of you, your masters, the Israeli state. Now, let's listen to another clip with David Menser being interviewed, this time on Channel 4 News, being interviewed by Krishnan Guru-Murthy.
Who have been starved for weeks, have been shot at while trying to collect aid. You are terrifying the population of Gaza even more. They're too scared now to go to collection points because they know they could be shot at by the IDF.
So that is precisely the Hamas rhetoric that they want you to publish.
It's the fact of what's happened. More than 50 people are dead.
No, that's not the facts, Krishnan. You have got the facts wrong because we've already shown you video of Hamas firing on their own people because this is the last hand. Yes, we have. We released it on Sunday evening.
That is a totally spurious video. It's a spurious video of a different incident
the video
in a different
of Hamas
place.
Firing. No, the video of Hamas firing on their own people trying to get hold of aid is spurious, is it? I think it's
You have no evidence
that
that was Hamas or it was at the same incident.
Okay, that's slightly ridiculous. Sometimes, Christian, you actually advocate for Hamas, and I must say it's bizarre.
No, that's offensive, David. And you really shouldn't say things like that.
It is offensive to Israel.
It's just attacking the media.
It is offensive to Israel.
It's a talking point, and it just shows you're avoiding the question. The question is...
I'm not avoiding the question. I'm precisely arguing...
This aid operation that you are operating now is ineffective. The UN one worked, and you have stopped the UN distributing aid.
The opposite is true.
It was the UN who were distributing aid, not Hamas.
The opposite is true, Christian.
They're dead, David. They're not just injuries. I mean, there's a pattern here, is the trouble, of you saying things and Israel saying things that turn out later to be untrue. And that's clearly what's happening here as well.
So that is what Hamas wants you to think. We have developed a new system to separate No, it's not the fact. The facts are that 7 million meals have been given to hungry Gazans. That's the facts.
Again, this lie being shamelessly repeated by David Menser about the video released by Israel of a totally different incident from the Eid massacres involving shootings by criminal gangs, which the evidence suggests, rather than being Hamas, are allied with Israel. But just listen to the desperation of the talking points. Sometimes you advocate for Hamas. Christian Guru Murthy is now Hamas. That's where we're at. The Israeli state has literally adopted a strategy of calling anyone and anything who doesn't regurgitate their shameless propaganda Hamas. Who is this convincing anymore? He says it's offensive to Israel. Well, maybe if Israel's feelings don't really be hurt, they should stop committing genocide and indeed every war crime under the sun. He says this is what Hamas want you to think. That's how he responds to incontrovertible facts. If you say facts, which are just facts, but inconvenient to Israel's arguments, then he says, well, that's what Hamas wants you to think. It's not a rebuttal, is it, in the classic sense? But I'm glad that Christian Guru Murthy points out that Israel keeps saying things which turn out to be untrue. In common parlance, we call those lies, by the way. And indeed, as with the Eid massacres, Israel's modus operandi has been to lie and lie and lie about the atrocities it commits, with a supine Western media amplifying those lies. And even when in some cases they take those lies apart, it's too late, lacking in prominence, and crucially when attention has moved elsewhere, and then divorce from wider coverage. That is, the Western media then carry on treating subsequent Israeli claims as somehow credible, continuing in many cases to frame entire stories around them, acting like that relentless pattern of lying just never happened. But honestly, wait till you hear this.
Hamas's leadership, and we are not. Listen, when the British Army is accused of doing misdemeanors, there is no independent investigation. There is an internal investigation.
Two wrongs don't make a right.
That's what all democracies do. No, because it's double standards, Christian. That's what you're guilty of. Different rules apply to Israel. Is it because we're Jewish, Christian?
What do you even say? Is it because we're Jewish, Christian? Beyond parody. If you were satirising these people, to be very clear, we're talking about the cheerleaders and spokespeople of the Israeli state, that's the sort of crap you'd come up with. There's no question the British Army committed war crimes in Afghanistan and Iraq, by the way, and I passionately support prosecutions for those who committed those crimes, as well as Tony Blair, who I, like millions of others, hold to be a war criminal. I've written about this extensively, by the way. It's not to belittle the crimes committed by the British Army, to point out that the Israeli army committing genocide against the people whose land it has stolen and illegally occupies is in a category of its own. This is all they have. Everything they say is a demonstrable and provable lie, so they just lash out and claim that anyone even challenging them is Hamas and anti-Semitic. Now, who is David Menser? You might be curious to find out. This really is grim. David Menser is the former director of Labour Friends of Israel, which lobbies on behalf of the pro-Israel cause. He worked as a political aide for multiple Labour MPs when Tony Blair was leader of the Labour Party. He's a former Labour councillor. It gets worse. Menser ran the mayoral campaign of a certain David Lammy. He's now the British Foreign Secretary. People with the worldview of David Menser are now in government. They're running the country. They're the sort of people in charge of the Labour Party. Now, I'm glad there's some actual scrutiny emerging of Israeli propagandists in mainstream media outlets, but alas, this is much too late for the people of Gaza. But that said, we can't stop fighting for accountability. This is important. Please like and subscribe. Please like and subscribe, leave your thoughts and your comments. Help us take on the pro-genocide media at patreon.com/OwenJerry4. Listen to us on the podcast. You can download wherever you get your podcasts. I'll speak to you soon.